Welcome back to Otherworldly Encounters. Along with my two counterparts, I'll be your host tonight. My name's Erebus.
I'm the beautiful and thought-provoking Nyx.
That's so. My name is Thoth.
Here on Otherworldly Entities, we like to dissect alien and other cryptid encounters.
That's right. We're back tonight with another round of alien encounters from Reddit.
I have been able to relax out at the fishing hole since we did the last episode.
That's why I don't live out in the middle of nowhere, Thoth. The aliens get buck fever with all the options in the city and don't know who to grab.
Meanwhile, you just need to watch out for whoever broke into your car last month.
They already decided I don't have anything worth taking. I don't think they'll be back to check in on me.
Maybe they'll leave you a little packet of ramen on the front seat next time to make sure you have food for the day.
I wish. I still remember before the pandemic when noodles were 20 cents a pack. Get a whole work week's lunch on $1. Now. It's 25 cents a pack even after the supply lines are back to normal. Total crock of horse shite.
Meh, I think I'll take my chances out here with the aliens where I can still nab a meal with the same pole I bought 25 years ago.
You can always bring Pepper and Biscuit out with you for safety.
I'm sure E.T. can spare a pack of hot dogs to deal with a couple of chicken heads like Pepper and Biscuit. Not that they'll need it. Those two'll be a half mile down the road before I even see the lights in the sky.
Well, this first story will be good for you then. Another story from the middle of where no one can hear you scream.
You say that like it's a bad thing. I don't want to hear my neighbors getting murdered anyways.
Haha, right. I didn't feel like people would be tripping over themselves to come help me when I lived in LA.
Fair enough, us Seattleites like to keep to ourselves too. But getting this show back on the road, we're on to our first mysterious encounter. Story 1. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago. When my dad was a kid, he's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Crud's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice, and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird crud would happen to my dad. Some of it is pretty similar to the stuff described in this thread, actually isolated earthquakes in Illinois that nobody else felt, bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just effing with me, and trust me, I prefer to believe that. But I have good reasons to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make crud up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making this crud up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO crud has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home, they're out shopping / at work / whatever. Suddenly this big black car pulls into his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here: not only is this a rural area, but it's 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens and out steps a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions, and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks my dad if he lives here. My dad says yes, and asks why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone, and seems almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes, and again asked why he wanted to know. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty uncomfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent. His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his car door, gets inside and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mom saw the same effing dude 30 effing years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something to know the details really when she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at table in the cafe, 30 feet or so from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude, dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mom had heard this story from my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of this man. He definitely stood out. So she's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the F, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the MIB sent their most inept agent to follow around my dad. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't effing know. I know this is all very vague. I'm going to bring it up to my dad tonight and try to clarify a few details. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out.
This one kind of reminds me of those old Donald Duck cartoons where his psychologist uncle would follow them around and document how much of a D-bag Donald was.
Yeah. Did they play those right before a duck and cover short? How old are you, man?
Well, hey now. I saw those too. He'd always be antagonizing his nephews while they were just trying to play on the ice or something.
My favorite was when they tried to do something nice for Donald, so he forced them to smoke cigars until they all got sick.
Another heartwarming Disney classic.
There's actually a lot of good stuff in those old cartoons. Think about it.
Yeah, it's anti-smoking, against temper tantrums, and shows you not to try helping others. I stick by all of it.
Ha. Whatever, man. You can have your child abuse duck. My generation grew up on wholesome stuff like South Park and Archer.
But more importantly, did you notice the description of the alien in that last story? Not your typical gray, right? It's something really important to the whole UFO culture, but we'll have to dive more into that on another episode. For now, one of the comments to the OP's story sums up the situation nicely. The comment goes, I work with a guy who's really into alien and conspiracy stuff, and he said, according to conspiracy theorists, there's like 4 known alien species. One of which is called Nordic blondes. They are tall, very fair, light skin and blonde hair with really blue eyes, but their eye sockets are wider than humans. They can stereotypically be identified as the Aryan race, hence their name, Nordic and blonde, and that all these alien species are telekinetic to a certain degree. Maybe that's why they all of a sudden had a change in demeanor. They probably realized they were recognized by your mom, and they probably knew exactly what your dad saw. Again, this is all theoretical. I think.
I imagine they upgraded to the tall, handsome model to rope in more abductees.
Give me a couple drinks and I'm down.
Now, Nix's promiscuity might actually have a lot to do with their appearance, but again, we'll get into that on another episode. For now, the important takeaway is that there are multiple types or races of aliens suspected of visiting Earth. We'll save the why of it all for later, as it's a fairly long story for each race. We have one more comment that was left on the OP, also dealing with Nordic blondes. It goes, "Wow, I have a roommate who told me she saw an alien in her room exactly like the one you described. Super tall, light-skinned, blonde. I don't talk to her often, but the alien topic came up one day after she saw me watching a movie in the living room, and she confessed to me about what happened to her. Of course I thought she was crazy, but why would she lie about that? She looked dead serious and even freaked out when she told me about it. Freaked me out even more thinking that an alien knows where we effing live. But honestly, I'm just hoping she's crazy or confused or had a weird dream or something."
Story 2. I've had sleep paralysis and dreams of both grays and human-looking aliens since I was 8, but two things stand out for me. One night in 1998 or 9, I woke up in a dark room, no paralysis, actually awake. I didn't see any details of the room except that it was dark and I was laying on some form of table. More important was that I was wide awake looking up at a gray. He was on my right side and looking down at me. I freaked the F out and started shaking uncontrollably in fear and rolled over to face him, no idea why I didn't roll the other way. As I rolled, I looked him directly in the eyes. That was the most profound thing I've ever seen. I saw a deep intelligence there, but it was also like the blackness of his eyes were a window out into a black universe filled with stars. It was an image that only lasted a second, but I found it really spiritual. When I completed my roll and was curled up in a ball, I heard a voice in my head, "Go back to sleep." I conked out and that was it. It was the most spiritual and most terrifying moment of my life. More importantly, many of the dreams have involved a blonde girl. Looks about 20, thin, always wears white, kinda like if you make a t-shirt out of a wedding dress, 5 foot 7 inch, shoulder length straight blonde hair. I should also point out that my parents are very antisocial and that at that time I was in high school and we didn't exactly have any visitors. I'm also the only blonde person in my family. Constant dreams of a blonde girl associated with aliens? No big deal. Finding literally hundreds of hairs matching hers around my parents' place changed things for me. It only lasted about a year in 1999 to 2000, but I found them on a regular basis. They always seemed to be left in places where only I would find them. Some were woven into clothes, some had intricate knots, and I even saw one drop out of mid-air in front of me. They didn't match anyone I knew, let alone anyone who ever was in the house. Fast forward 13 years and I finally decided to get some of the hairs analyzed. The result? A Lithuanian female. As far as I know, I've never met anyone from Lithuania. I got my own genetics done in case of contamination. We share a few markers, but it's definitely not the same. By far her best ancestry match is Lithuanian, and Lithuanian is way down the list of possible ancestries for me. I plan to do more tests at some point when money isn't so tight. I know a few hairs is hardly conclusive evidence, but a random tidbit I find interesting. A guy named Peter Curry found supposed alien hairs years ago, and one thing that stuck out was that there was a gene for HIV resistance. Lithuanians also have a chunk of their population which shares this gene. Also a random thought, I know that people often dismiss sleep paralysis as it's known to cause hallucinations, but one thing I've always wondered is what if you could purposely induce it in someone? No clue how, just a thought. I can't imagine how frustrated this kid's dad is whenever he tries to bring up the topic of all of this blonde female hair he's finding around the house.
Shut up. No, shut it. That's all just alien stuff, obviously, and we don't talk about aliens in this house. Especially not to your mother. You didn't tell your mother about this, did you? Good, she hates aliens. Why don't you go around the house and collect any of this alien hair you can find? And don't go telling your mother, scare her into an early grave with all this alien talk.
Oh, and what was that you said about HIV? Did it look like this alien might have it? Phew, great, that's great for her. Nasty disease.
At some point you have to feel bad for the Greys. Every time they show up, someone gets PTSD. Meanwhile, the hot blondes are walking around in broad daylight, getting digits and causing wet dreams.
I bet they bully the ugly little buggers too.
Hey guys, anyone want to hit up Starbucks on the way home? Hold up. Get back in the trunk, Marvin! Ugly bastard's gonna kill someone with that mug.
Story 3. Alright, I have a bizarre one for you guys. Oh boy, here we go. This is back in 2003 when I was 15 years old in the area of Columbus, Ohio. I was up late one night finishing an English paper that I had postponed until the last minute. It ended up taking longer than I thought and I wasn't done until around 3:10 a.m. I finished up, turned off the computer and went upstairs to fall asleep. I get in bed and notice the clock says 3:15 before I finally close my eyes to get some sleep. About 30 seconds or so after I do that, I begin to hear footsteps up the stairs. At first I was thinking, who the heck would be up right now? Maybe my dad. One thing I'll always remember were how odd the steps were. They were abnormally slow, and with each step the foot would slide forward until it hit the next step and then lift up. Eventually the steps stop and I assume whoever it is made it to the top of stairs. I don't hear anything and then I get a feeling of a presence in the room. I have a feeling whoever it is now at the end of my bed. I'm currently lying on my side with my legs turned over so that my lower back is kind of facing upward. I begin to feel a pressure go into my lower back, like a hand going into my body and tapping me to see if I'm awake. This is when I'm starting to get real cautious and concerned. Next, I feel this same pressure pierce through my legs and stays there. It almost sounds and feels like whoever this is just laid down beside me on the side facing my face. I sit there silently and wait about 10 seconds, or so it felt, and feel another pressure go into my chest. It felt as if someone was taking their hands and put them inside me. The pressure in the legs was still there. This pressure in my chest began to build, and it felt like a swirling, buzzy, warm feeling. This is where it gets even more weird. So whatever this is on my bed begins to whisper to me, but it sounds very clear and as if it were coming from inside my head. It seemed to be telepathic. It says, "Put it on your head." I immediately start get nervous and panic internally and wonder what the hell is going on. I tell myself that I have to open my eyes and force myself to count down from 5. I open them and see a transparent face in front of me about 1 foot away. I'd say the face was about 50% transparent. I couldn't make out any clear, distinct facial features, but I could see 2 darker circles where eyes would be, and a small oblong shape for a mouth. This all processed in about 1 second. The next second my reaction is to open my eyes and mouth wide in disbelief. I immediately saw this other being's face do the same as if it were just as shocked. About 1 second after that, I shut my eyes, throw my sheet over my face, and go into extreme panic and become paralyzed. The last thing I saw was this being's face opened up wide and moving backwards. I hear this being fall off the bed from leaning back and makes a thump on the floor. It wasn't a very loud thump, but still audible. It sprints the heck out of my room and down the stairs. I never hear a door open or anything. I lay in my bed awake the whole 3 hours until I have to get up for school at 6:30. The first hour I couldn't even move. I was in shock and the scene kept playing in my head. I knew my door was still open, but I wanted to close it so bad. After the first hour, I calmed down enough to get up and close the door. Jumped back into bed and just kept thinking about it until my sister got up. I've looked back on this a lot since then and it forever changed my life. I've only spoken to a few people about this and I never even mentioned it to my dad. Of course, some will say it was a lucid dream or some hallucination, but it was very clear and I was awake the entire night. I've never had anything like it since then and never expressed any odd mental symptoms. I was also 15 and never had a beer or any drug by then. A few other notes from that night. The being glowed a light blue that caused the area around him to light up a bit. The being was laying sideways beside me with its legs traveling through mine. This accounts for the first feeling of pressure that stayed after the touches on the lower back. I think when it said to put it on your head, it was referring to whatever it was building up inside my chest. Maybe it thought I was asleep and it was speaking to my subconscious. Man, that night was a doozy.
This is yet another story that shows how deeply impactful this is on the victim. Even if this was sleep paralysis, it seems so real to the op that he really needs someone to convince him of it, but he's left in a position where he can't even talk about it with anyone.
Yeah, this whole sleep paralysis thing is interesting. I've definitely had some experience with it, and I think most people will have by the time they hit my age, but the OP in the second story raises a good point I'd never considered before. Who says aliens can't induce sleep paralysis?
God, I can't even remember what I was watching. It must have been like 15 years ago, but in the show, some researchers were trying to reproduce the effects of alien abductions in sleepy people. I think they were using some electrode helmet to stimulate brain activity, and some of the people participants described it as angels, some were more demonic, and some were aliens. The whole thing was presented as real, but I can't say how legitimate it was given how long ago this all was.
You listen to Joe Rogan long enough and you will hear about natural DMT production in the brain too. I'm still trying to figure out how to flip that switch.
Even if we dig up research papers on whatever you saw and the whole thing is proven to be pretty common, good luck getting a bunch of men talking about how their bad dreams affected them. Story 4. When I was a kid, I lived right on the edge of the state forest. My friends and I would go adventuring out there all the time, and as we got a bit older, middle school age, we started camping and just going for hikes to unwind. One night I went out for a walk by myself on a trail I knew with my eyes closed. I had left my house at maybe 8 p.m. I sat down in a small clearing after about 20 minutes of walking and stared up at the stars at what I thought was an airplane until I realized it wasn't moving but slightly pulsing. I could feel the pulses in my chest like they were synced up with my heartbeat. I just kinda shook it off after maybe 15 minutes as a weird coincidence and hopped up to meander my way home. When I got home, all the lights were off, which I found kinda weird until I went to plug my phone in. It was 2 a.m.
Story 5. When I was 5, I saw 3 greys at dawn while camping in the backyard with my cousin. They froze me and I panicked, mostly because I couldn't move. They looked at me for a few seconds and left. When I was 19, I was camping in New Mexico near this school for deaf kids. We heard this screaming, so we popped out of the tent to see a large glowing upside-down lampshade thing in the middle of this field 30 feet away. It drifted up into the night and accelerated fast until it popped like a firework in the sky.
Story 6. Well, this is an interesting story, I guess. Maybe some of you will enjoy it, although I'm going to try to summarize. For 3 nights, strange things happened. The first night I was reading, and I remember a peculiar sensation wrapping around the top of my head and traveling down my neck. I never had anything like this occur to me. It was like a static massage, and I took note. It kind of scared me. I soon went to bed, yet was awoken in the middle of the night at some point. I was on my back and looking at my window. I remember I was hallucinating extremely bad. The window was morphing and innumerable colors were present. I remember thinking at this time 2 things. First, I was absolutely awake. Second, although delirious, I recalled that these hallucinations were normal, and I was glad to be greeted by them because they happen every night. When I woke up the next morning, I had a startling realization that I don't actually hallucinate every night and couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it seemed so normal at the time. The second night, the exact same thing happens. Strange sensation on my head. I go to sleep, I awake tripping. This time I'm on my stomach looking towards the lights of my computer tower on the floor. There were symbols emanating from the colors of those blue and orange lights, and I was visibly tripping. Again, I was comforted by the thought that this was normal, and awoke to consider how peculiar it was to think it was. The third night I'll never forget. It changed my fracking life. I remember waking up to an extremely vivid image of three beings hovering in front of me. Their skin was gray, heads large, and bodies much taller than the normal stature of a human. There was rocky earth beneath us, lit quite well, possibly by an extremely starry sky above me, yet no other visible light source. This image flashed in front of my eyes for a split second, and then I was looking at the blackness of my closed eyelids. I then became aware of the most incredible sensation I have ever felt. Although I could feel myself localized within my body, there was an expanse. Words will never do this justice, as I fear it was too much a subjective experience. In my description, I can only describe it with an introverted intuition. The best analogy I can make is with attaining nirvana in a Buddhist sense. I felt connected with everything in the world, and have never had such strange experiences, to my knowledge, since then. I became compelled to understand what happened to me. I'm an academic, so my research brought me to areas where in one hemisphere of my brain screams pseudoscience, at the other more open and inquisitive side. The truths of my hemispheres of thought almost became relegated to the single truth I could agree fully upon: I know nothing, and therefore, anything is possible. Over a few years, I found answers that have made me content at night, yet unfortunately batshit crazy to anyone I would consider talking to this about. I began researching past life regressions. No, everyone was not Abe Lincoln or Cleopatra in their last lives, channeling, abductions, transmeditation, and astral projection. First, I found that through one channeled experiment, a researcher, if you will call her that, asked a supposed entity what it was like in a higher dimension, and it was replied that it was like a shamanic experience. Like you were tripping. Second, through another book on channeling, an extremely advanced race was contacted, and they were asked how they contact individuals on Earth. It was suggested that not all abductions are physical encounters, and not all abductions, or otherwise, are bad. I now consider my experience took place in a dream state, and that it was a damn good experience. Apparently, this group of extraterrestrials, if I'm to consider the validity of this text, contacts individuals to guide their purpose in life, as they are not originally of Earth origin. Well, frick. That makes sense to me, I suppose. I know something extreme happened to me those 3 nights. I am reminded of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, and I wonder when the scientific actualization of our race will further frick with our paradigms. Maybe that movie will become classic science fact. For better or worse, it's interesting to see how people react to this kind of thing. We haven't really seen any stories of people that have an encounter and just kind of hand wave it away.
This guy described it as highly spiritual. That's been a common theme here. I'm surprised they even assume it was aliens and not like an angel or God or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. When did the concept of little greener gray men first pop up? Sci-fi was really big post-World War II. Before then, I bet this phenomenon could explain a lot of the visions from God in the olden days.
I don't want to open the whole religion can of worms right now, but who says that's not still happening? As we keep getting deeper into this subject, we'll see that there are some groups actively trying to tie Satan into this. If we ever do an episode on near-death experiences, we'll also get to see how that impacts people in a similar way. The bulk of sleep paralysis stories I could find can also be split between aliens and demons, but they read the same otherwise. I think it may be down to perception of the victim as to how they interpret it.
I wonder how many of these people end up getting some kind of brain scan like an MRI.
That's kind of what the study I mentioned earlier was, but I'd have to look it up now.
Yeah. I'm wondering if these people have a more active amygdala or a small benign tumor stimulating DMT production under certain conditions. I would think it would be easy to measure if their brain activity is different than normal while they're falling asleep or at any point in the sleep cycle. At least, simple in that you wouldn't necessarily need to be able to interpret what the differences mean, just that there is a different pattern of activity.
Yeah. Makes me wonder about the validity of whatever documentary you saw. If it was something reproducible, I think we'd hear more about it.
There have been a lot of bump docu-series of supposed learning channels over the years.
Oh, anyone remember the stupid mermaid thing on Animal Planet back in like 2005?
Yeah, unfortunately, but I swear, what I'm talking about didn't seem bogus. If anyone happens to know what I'm talking about, please list it in the comments. It was just like an hour-long study on religious or alien events while falling asleep. I think it was on Discovery or History Channel. Anyways, the last story had a relevant response in the thread. I've done reading before of different categorized races of alien beings, and the one you mentioned kind of sound like the Nordic aliens. They are very tall and slender beings, I think with large heads, rather pale white skin with very light blonde hair. They are considered the nicest people out there of the known races. They don't like seeing life destroyed. You might actually say they're almost angelic. Which leads to me something peculiar. I was once talking about this with a friend, a Catholic Mexican, and she was almost shocked at this because her mom listens to this Catholic radio station of which they were discussing this exact effing thing. On that program, they were discussing about an alien species that fit the exact description of the Nordics, but they were described as fallen angels from heaven. Even more interesting was when I was on YouTube one night, mostly because I was on Reddit trying to find things to do in Phoenix, and I watched some video that was a documentary about the Roswell crash. Apparently Area 51 is basically an intergalactic embassy, but that's not the point. The point of interest here was when in the 50s, an alien being volunteered to be interviewed. They don't speak, but communicate through telepathy, so the researchers at Area 51 needed the best people who could communicate through telepathy. Apparently, these alien beings, I'd presume especially the Nordics, are incredibly spiritual beings. They don't fear death, and it seems they believe in reincarnation. The body is literally just a vessel for the soul, and technology is only used to make the body more efficient. I bet what you experienced was a highly spiritual phenomenon. As you said, what happened to you was during a dream-like state. Your soul could have left your body, mostly your head, and encountered these beings, or the beings could have beckoned your soul. How fascinating.
Before we get into anything else, I just want to touch on that alien interview. I've seen parts of what I think they're talking about, and I think it's bogus. Not based on any special effects or anything, just on how incompetent the interrogator seems. He asks a lot of closed or leading questions. It's not at all how you see detectives interrogate, and you would imagine they would have the best of the best on this Marvin.
Well, I don't know. I see where you're coming from, but modern interrogators have had a lot of the legwork done for them through trial and error over the last few decades. Remember, it's not until relatively recently that all interrogations were recorded and available as educational tools.
I guess to some degree that's a fair point, but this isn't some beat cop trying to solve a hit and run. They get one chance to catch this ET off guard and get him to talk more than he intended to, but it's just softball after softball. Very direct, never so much as an attempt to tease more out of him. In the 1950s, America was probably more powerful, in relative terms, than it is today. Coming hot off the heels of all the interrogations of captured Nazis, I feel like the best agent the CIA could muster would still do a much better job than the guy in the video.
I've actually not seen this interview. I know of its existence, but I just assumed it was a hoax. I'm not one to overestimate middle management though. There's a good chance the interrogator was just some site manager that wanted to be the first person on record talking to an alien because he thought it would be cool.
Yeah, okay, I could buy that. I still don't think it's real, but it's been a few years. Maybe I'll give it another watch and look at it with fresh eyes.
The reason I wanted to read that comment though, is because it leans into the whole religious direction you were thinking of. I don't know if it's just a misspeak, but they called them fallen angels and I thought that's what Satan was. It's not as popular of a theory, but some people try to link the aliens to all kinds of supernatural stuff that feeds off our fear and suffering.
Sounds like someone should show them Monsters, Inc.
Oh wow, that really fits all the extra-dimensional stuff too.
What does Pixar know?
Steve Jobs didn't die, he just went home.
I think that's a good place to end our night before we get hit by the Disney hammer.
Mickey looks a lot like a Gray to me too. And they've really been controlling humanity's culture for the last 60 years. Gorsh, something wrong here.
Okay, that's our show for the night. We'll be back every Friday with a new video.
If you've had any experience with aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, please tell your story in the comments. We're not exactly aiming to prove anything is real or not, but we do want to normalize talking about these subjects and experiences.
Hope you all have a good night, get plenty of sleep. And remember, if you think you're being visited by aliens, coat your doorknob in Vaseline so you can die peacefully of a heart attack before they can dissect you alive.